Um, so yesterday we learned something called function notation. Function notation takes things and makes them change from looking like this takes a regular equation and it changes it to look like this. So literally, the only thing that's really changing is that y and f of x mean the same thing, right? The reason that's handy for us is then they can give us input values without having to write a lot of stuff, right? They could just take this function notation, change x to be something, and then that means you know the input value. That's really the only perk of it. It also allows you to know that the thing you have must be a function because it's written in function notation. And it's kind of like a rule that we have. You can't write a non-function in function notation, I suppose. What we're going to do today is we're just going to look at a question that uses function notation. So the class example 1. It's going to be a good review of all the kind of things we've done, like graphing and all that jazz. So it says a candle manufacturer found that their long-last candles melted according to this formula. H of t equals negative 2t plus 12, where h is the height of the candle in centimeters after t hours. So the height is a function of time that the candle's been burning. That makes sense, right? The height's going to change depending how long it's been burning. So h is a function of t. This is the exact same thing as saying y equals negative 2, and instead of t, they can say x plus 12. These mean like the same thing. Theirs just has context to it, right? It's just written in a different format. Question A. Use a graphing calculator to sketch the graph of the function and show the graph on the grid. Okay, we're going to graph this together. So pull out your graphing calculators. When you want to graph something, you put this into your y1, just a reminder on how to do that. y1 and y2 and all those things are right here, and your y equals button. So you, in the top left-hand corner, you hit y equals. It'll bring you to a long list of things. It says y1 equals, y2 equals, y3 equals, and so on and so forth. You want to clear all those things out. Make sure there's nothing in there. Okay? Delete anything that might be in there. And then in y1, you're going to type this equation. Negative 2x plus 12. Your negative button is right here beside your decimal. Don't use your subtract button if it's the first thing in an equation. Use your negative button if it's the first thing in an equation. So negative 2. Your x button is beside your alpha button, so it's right here. Negative 2x. And then plus 12. Before you can graph this thing, we want to set up a window or a graph or a grid that it would make sense for the question. So click on window. When you go to window, it should say like x min, x max, x scale, y min, y max. So you should get a big list like that of things. You got that? Fantastic. For our question, instead of x, it was actually t, right? And it's the same thing, but it means time. So when you're setting a window for a word problem, we try to use logic. If x is actually time, and how long the candle's been burning for, x minimum would represent the minimum amount of time you could burn a candle. What's the least amount of time you could burn a candle for? Oh, it's 0 hours, right? You haven't burned it at all. You wouldn't have negative 10, because that doesn't make sense. You're not going to burn a candle for negative hours. But you could burn it for 0 hours, and that would be the lowest number possible. So for x min, go 0. Graphically, that represents down here that my x values are going to go to 0. That would be the lowest it goes. X maximum, that's the longest amount of time that a candle will burn. Not like a candle expert, but I think if you had a candle and you set it and you burn it for like 10 hours, Seems like a long time to burn a candle to me. So I'm just logically going to make a guess at it. Right? And if I'm wrong, at least I'll be close enough that I can still see my graph, and then I can fix it from there. If I put 3,000, that doesn't make any sense. No candles burning for 3,000 hours, right? So you just try to pick a logical number. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, just something logical will work. To me, 10 hours would be a long time. So my X maximum is going to be 10. On a graph, that means my X-axis goes from 0 to 10. That's what that represents. SCL means X scale. That's what you're counting by. I always leave my scale at 1. It's just easier that way. Y minimum. In your question, you have to realize what Y represents. In our question, Y was height. What's the lowest height that my candle could be at? 0, right? I burn it all the way down. It's at a height of 0. It's completely gone. I'm not going to have negative height. It doesn't make sense that it would go into the negatives. I'm not going to have like positive 20 as my minimum because that would be a really big burnt out candle, I guess. So we're going to put 0 as our minimum height. That's the lowest it'll ever go. Graphically, that means my Y values are going to go to 0. That's the lowest it'll go. Y maximum, the tallest that this thing's ever going to be. All right, they did give you a little bit of context. So if you look, it said H is height in centimeters. Okay, so if you look at a ruler, that's how I like judge everything. By rulers. Rulers are 30 centimeters long, which you would know because this one doesn't have centimeters on it. If I had a candle that was that tall, that'd be a very, very tall candle. I think maybe about half of that would probably be reasonable. I think still a really tall candle, but half of a ruler would be pretty reasonable. So I'm going to say my maximum is 15. 15 centimeters seems like a good maximum. If I'm wrong and I need to go a little higher, I can always go back to my window and fix it. Okay? I'm just trying to make a logical guess so I can kind of see my graph. Once you put these in your window, 15 means that's the maximum Y I'd ever get. Once I put the window in, I can then hit graph, which is right there, top right-hand corner, and it should draw a line for you, a graph for you. I just have to fix my window. I wasn't doing a lot of talking. When I do that, I get this graph. I get that purple line I just drew. What that purple line represents is the height of my candle after T hours burning. This would be the starting height, right? At 0 hours. And then as we go along, time goes on, it's burning, the candle gets lower and lower. This graph makes sense. And then eventually, the height hits 0. Awesome. Did we get that graph? Yeah. Yep. Does it look like that? Let me take a peek. Oh, definitely not. Hopefully that'll work. Awesome. Now we can answer questions about this. So question B says, determine the value of H of 5. This, you have to know what it means. That's function notation. When they change the inside value, that means they gave you an input value. This means X equals 5. So if X equals 5, you have to try to figure out what the Y value is. Your calculator can take input values really well. The way that you give it input values is while you're looking at your graph, hit the trace button. It's right beside graph. Trace means I'm giving you an input value. So you hit trace, then you hit 5 because that's your input value, and you hit enter. And on the bottom of your graph, it'll say X equals 5, Y equals 2. That means the height of the candle after 5 hours would be 2. The y value would be 2. Right? That's how your calculator takes input values. It does a very good job of taking input values. Part C, write in words the meaning of h of 5. This means the height of the candle after 5 hours burning. That's what that represents, right? You can always interpret these situations, these word problems. And as you go on in the grades, you have to do a lot of that stuff. Okay, where you're going to have a graph, you're going to have some sort of input, and then you need to interpret that situation and understand what's going on. Fantastic. For part D, we're going to evaluate the following. Evaluate means calculate the outputs given the inputs. This first one, h of 0, that means x equals 0. Your calculator takes inputs very well. You just hit trace, right there, then 0, and then enter. And you end up with y equals 12. So h of 0 equals 12. What does that mean? Okay, so we calculated it. Now explain the significance of it, its meaning. Anyone want to take a stab at what that means? It does tell us something. Yeah. That's before the candle even started burning. So that's the starting height of your candle. So if I asked you, hey, how tall is the candle that you buy? This would represent how tall the candle is that you bought. Right? We never burned it. 0 hours. The height was 12 centimeters. I'm just going to call it the starting height. Because I can't write a lot with this board. Just weird things. Right? That's what it represents. So it actually has meaning to it. Question B says h of 6. That means x equals 6. So we put that in our calculator. We go trace 6, enter. And at the bottom, it tells us that h of 6 equals 0. Who wants to try to explain what that would tell us about this question? Yeah.
That's how long the candle would last.
That's how long the candle would last, right? My height is at 0. That means when x equals 6, or after 6 hours, the height is 0. This candle can burn for up to 6 hours. Right? Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is it?
Oh, it's because your cursor's just on it. Mine's doing that too. You see the cursor's there? You remember that little like blinky thing that moves?
Okay.
It's just blinking right on that. So a good point is that with these calculators, sometimes when you're calculating things, your little cursor will always be on your line somewhere. And right now it might be right where you're trying to read the y equals. So sometimes it might help to make your window go a little bit past 0, like your y minimum. Instead of it being 0, maybe put -5, and then you'll have a little bit of a gap. So then you can actually read your info a little nicer. I forgot about that. Awesome. Noah nailed it. This is how long the candles last for. The candles last 6 hours. Does anybody burn a lot of candles? Is that good? 6 hours? Yeah, that's pretty good. Like, oh, I don't count a lot of birds. Alright, triple I here. This is h of 8, that means x equals 8. If I try calculating that, right, trace 8, enter, I get negative 4. So h of 8 equals negative 4. What that tells me is that after the candle burns for 8 hours, the height would be at negative 4. Does that make sense? Yeah, it burned right through the table. I just kept going. No, this point has no meaning. Right? It's not logical. So I would just put the significance of it has no meaning. Right? So as long as you can remember what your things represent, you'll be able to interpret situations really nicely. Fantastic. Question E. How long will it take for the candle to burn down to a height of 7 centimeters? This time, they gave you an output and they want an input. Right? In every given question, they should be giving you either X or Y. This time they said height equals 7, so they need Y equals 7. If you're looking for that, then they want you to find X. All these questions, they'll give you either X or Y. You have to figure out the other one. When given a Y value, that's tricky for us because our calculator doesn't know how to handle outputs. It doesn't know how to go from output to input, just the other way around. So what we have to do is draw a second line. So when we see Y equals 7, we say Y2 equals 7. And we go to our Y equals, click Y equals in the top left-hand corner, we go to Y2 and we make it equal 7. And then we hit graph. When we do that, we now get a line right here. Like that. You now have a horizontal line where Y equals 7. Anywhere along this blue line is Y equals 7. We want to know where on the purple line Y equals 7. Logically speaking, where these two things cross each other, that's where it equals 7. To figure out where things cross each other, we call that the intersection. To figure that out, you go second, which is right here, trace, up here, and there's a big list of things. The fifth thing on the list says intersection. So second, then trace, option 5, intersect. When you click intersect, it'll bring you back to your graph, and on the bottom it says first curve, and you should have a little blinky somewhere. Mine's over here. Using your left and right arrows, not your up and down, just your left and right, move that little blinker close to where these two things are crossing each other. So I'm going to move with my left arrow so it's kind of up here, kind of close. I don't have to be right on it, just close. Then I hit enter. It now says second curve, and my blinker is already really close. Hit enter again. It says guess, hit enter one more time. And it will tell you that right there, X equals 2.5 when Y equals 7. That means it takes 2.5 hours to reach a height of 7. Fantastic. The last one. The hardest one. F. Suggest an appropriate domain and range of the function. We haven't done domain and range in a long time. Right, so let's start with domain. To write domain, we go D, colon, curly bracket, X. Actually, technically we should put T. T, such that. Right, that's how we always start off our domain. Usually it's the letter X instead of T, but in this question, X is T. Right? They're the same thing. So that's why I switched it to be a T. This is just the starting. Reading it, it would read domain is time such that. The first thing we do with domain is we write the furthest left that our graph could go, or the minimum value for X. For us, we now have to put that in context, because technically this line goes forever to the left, forever to the right. However, it represents something. It represents the time a candle's burning. So I can't go forever to the left on time burning, right? That doesn't make sense. Instead, I have to think about it. What's the minimum amount of time my candle can burn? 0 hours. So 0 is the lowest value for time I could have. And then I put this little symbol right here, and then T. What this represents so far is that time can be anything greater than 0. Makes sense. Yeah, the time that a candle burns could be any amount greater than 0. However, we know that there's a maximum amount of time this candle burns, right? Like there's a top point. So we put the same symbol, and we put the maximum amount of time that you could burn a candle for. We calculated that earlier. What was the maximum amount of time it could burn? 6 hours. This now says time can be burning for anything in between 0 to 6 hours. That makes sense for our question, right? We know that's true. It goes from 0 all the way up to 6. We also tag on there, time is an element of the reals. That means it could be any real number in between 0 and 6. It could be decimals, which is true, right? Time doesn't just go from 1 hour to 6 hours. There's decimals in there. Range. Range starts like that. R is curly bracket height such that. Normally we put Y instead of H, but this is a word problem, so we change it to H. Awesome, we're going to follow the same rules, but now we're talking about height values. So the first one is going to be the minimum height you could have. What's the lowest this candle could ever get to? 0, yeah. So you go 0 is less than or equal to all other heights. That means the height has to be bigger than 0. True, it definitely does have to be bigger than 0. Candle's not going below 0. However, this is saying that it could be anything bigger than 0. My candle can't be 2 million centimeters, right? We have to put some sort of upper limit on it. What's the maximum height that you could have? It's 12. When you write that, you put the same symbol and then 12. This now says that height must be greater than 0 or less than 12. And it can be anywhere in between, which is true, right? When you start burning it, it starts at 12. It can go anywhere in between. We also finish it off with H is an element of the reals. Again, we say that because the height can be any type of number in between 0 and 12. Not just whole numbers or something